Um, our goal today is to solve our absolute value equation. You have to isolate the absolute value first, and so what we usually have done is focus on isolating the variable. So all that means is you have to get the absolute value by itself, and then write and solve the two equations. When we talk about the two equations, we're talking about the positive side of 0 and the negative side of 0. Those are what make up the two equations. Because remember, when we dealt with your warm-up, we talked about positive 30 and negative 30 both being solutions to the equation. So we have to have the positive solution and the negative. You will always have two answers, ladies and gentlemen, unless it's no solution. Okay, so if you find one answer, 3, 4.5, you know there should be a second answer. So here's what it looks like. My absolute value is already isolated. It's just the absolute value equaling 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what's inside that absolute value, x plus 3, and I know that that has to equal 7, or that x plus 3 has to equal negative 7. That's what it means to write two equations. So we're going to subtract 3. We get x is equal to 4. We're going to subtract 3. Now notice, ladies and gentlemen, what happens. I'm not getting positive 4 and negative 4 this time. As soon as you have some expression that you're evolving in your absolute value, you do have to go through and solve those, because what we have is x negative 10. Thank you. I'm doing bad instruments today. It must be contagious.
Yeah.
Negative 10. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were to check this, if I take 4 and plug it in here, I have 4 plus 3. Does that equal 7? Well, absolute value of 7, is that 7? Yeah. If I check my negative 10, what's negative 10 plus 3? Negative 7. And is the absolute value of negative 7 equal to 7? Yeah. And so both of these answers work, even though one of them is 4 and one of them is negative 10. Okay, guys? So you're going to have two answers. We're just not always going to have the plus or minus 30 or the plus or minus 3 that you saw in your warm-up. All right, let's take a look. Your goal was to isolate the absolute value. Is the absolute value by itself right now? No, we've got a plus 5. So Tyler, how do I get rid of a plus 5? Minus 5. So I'm going to subtract 5 from the left, subtract 5 from the right. Now I've got the absolute value. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, I haven't gotten rid of the absolute value. I only lose my absolute value when I'm writing my two equations. So while you're still isolating that absolute value, you still need to keep those brackets around there. So now what I'm going to do is take what's inside that absolute value and write my two equations. I'm going to take 3x minus 2 is equal to positive 7. I'm going to take 3x minus 2 and set it equal to negative 7. So once you isolate your absolute value, then you know what your positive and negatives are going to be. So now I can add 2 to solve. X is equal to 3. Back to doing some basic algebra. Add 2 to isolate x. I get 3x is equal to negative 5. Divide by 3. I get x is equal to negative 5/3. It's going to be, and then it's a negative, guys. Sorry. Once I look at where you're at, it's hard to tell. Once we get into these absolute values, it's really common to see fractions in there. To have one answer that's a whole number, and then another answer that's a fraction. All right, the next part that we're going to have are solving absolute values, equations, and inequalities. We've already solved the equations. We're now going to take a look at the inequalities. You're still going to do the same thing, isolate the absolute value, and then write and solve two inequalities. But what you need to remember here, ladies and gentlemen, is you need to figure out, is it an and inequality or is it an or inequality? All right? And the way we do that is the ands are moving closer to 0. So that means it's your less than or your less than or equal to. I want to be less than so many spaces from 0, so I want to get close to 0. Okay? The or, if you think of that or graph, those ors were moving away from each other. So ors means you want to move away. You want more space from 0. Okay? So that's the greater than or equal to or just the greater. So often the way we read our statement, guys, you hear which inequality it's going to be. And so we're going to solve these and graph because you're going to have to do some graphing tomorrow on your worksheet. So let's take a look at what we're going to do. We have 2x minus 3 is less than 14. I know I kind of drew out my statement there, guys, but you hear that and in there, less than. All right. So I'm going to take my inequality, or my absolute value, I'm sorry, and I want to be less than 14 spaces from 0. It's an and, and I want 2x minus 3, but I want it to be greater than negative 14. And the reason for that, guys, is that if I want to be less than 14 spaces from 0, we think of this on a number line. If I'm at 14, I would have to move towards 0 to be less than 14 spaces from 0. If I'm at negative 14, I would have to move towards 0. So do you guys see how those arrows are going in opposite directions up here? That means when you write your inequalities, they have to be going in opposite directions. Your positive stays with what you had. The positive stayed less than. The greater than had to switch directions so that it's heading closer to 0. I see quite a few of you already solving because once you have those written, you're going to solve those like the and inequalities that we did last week. So we're going to go through and add 3 to each side. We get 2x is less than 11. I'm sorry, we're adding 3, so it should be 17. Divide by 2. I get x is less than, and if you want to call that 8.5, guys, you can. It's a nice decimal. I now need to go and solve my next one. I'm going to add 3. And I get 2x is greater than negative 11. Divide by 2. And I get x is greater than negative, and you can call this 5.5. Now tonight you're going to have to graph. I want to take that back. I'm not sure if you have to graph in tonight's homework. I know on tomorrow's worksheet you do have to graph. I need to plot 8.5. 8.5 needs to go on the positive side of 0, guys. Negative 5.5 needs to go on the negative side of 0. I want it to be less than 14 spaces from 0 when I started out my problem, so I need to be moving towards 0. If you look at your inequality, I'm shading less than 8.5. It's an open circle. I'm shading greater than 5.5. And are those two shadings headed towards 0? When I shaded them, did they head towards 0? All right, and that's exactly what you want less than to do. You want to move closer to 0. Okay, guys? I'll put this screen back up, guys, so you can get this stuff written down if you didn't get a chance to, but I want to take a look at example 4 with you. All right, here we have a greater than, as many of you would expect. But the first thing I need to do here is a little bit different. Before I write my two inequalities, guys, I have to get that absolute value isolated. I don't do anything with two problems, the positive and negative side of 0, until I have my absolute value isolated. So I have x plus 11 is greater than 21. I want to be more than 21 spaces from 0. Okay, so if we were to think of what that looks on a number line, if I want to be more than 21 spaces from 0, I would have to be moving away from 0. At negative 21, I would have to be going in the opposite direction and heading away from 0. That's what it means to be more than 21 spaces from 0. So we say that more, it sounds like an or, so this is going to be our or inequality. So I'm going to take what we have here, x plus 11, and I want to be more than 21 spaces from 0, or I need x plus 11 to be less than or equal to negative 21. The shading shows you're moving away from 0, so it has to be greater than 21. You're moving to the left, so it had to be less than negative 21. We subtract 11. I get x is greater than or equal to 10. I do the same algebra. That's the nice thing about these is your algebra steps are just repeats. You're going to subtract 11, but this time because you're subtracting from a negative, you get negative 32. I want you guys to graph these. So we're going to draw our number line. I know I want to be more than 21 spaces away from 0, so my two graphs should be moving away from each other, trying to get away from 0. So if I've got 0 here, I put positive 10 on the number line. I put negative 32 on the number line. It's a closed circle, and I need to be greater than 10, so I did move away from 0. Here I need to be less than negative 32, and the same thing happens. I moved away from 0. So guys, it does take a lot of time when we get to these absolute value inequalities of slowing down, thinking, am I moving closer because I want to be less than 14 spaces from 0, or is it an or because I'm moving away from 0 to be more than 21 spaces? Okay? Your assignment is on your agenda. It's a book assignment, guys, so let's get that out and get started.